will
put
get
it that way.
Do you guys understand the consequences of what you've just done?
No.
White people I understand now because they just are who they are. A dog is just a damn dog. You know what I'm saying? So you can't too much get mad at a damn dog and shit. The motherfucker is only being who he is made to be.
You guys are not going to get any scholarships because this is a hate crime.
We all dropped out of high school. It's okay.
They still say little racist shit when you get around them, even though they mean good. But it's their nature. You know what some racist shit. They just say the shit without even thinking. It'd be like, they just say some fucked up shit. You be like, that's some fucked up shit. But they don't, they be your best friend and they don't be saying the stuff to hurt you. That's just their nature.
And I still don't think it's appropriate for you guys to be doing this. It's really...
He's the son of a lower entity.
Thank you for tuning in to the Sisters Talk podcast. I'm your host, Danny M. And today we have a very special guest that is coming on in just a moment. Today's topic is colorism in Mexico. Okay, a couple of years ago with Nikki, my co-host, we did colorism in America. So now we're taking it to a different culture and a different country. Guys, this is Black History Month. So happy Black History Month to everyone that's out there, every melanated being. This is a very strong topic. I want everyone to come on, join the live, comment. I want you to be brutally honest about your comments and your questions. This is an open platform with an open conversation, open opportunity to just get your voice heard. I will be reading those comments live today. Without further ado, I will be bringing on our special guest, Mr. Ricardo Ignacio, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you. How you doing?
Definitely. I'm doing pretty good. I've been pretty busy, but I'm kicking it. I'm alive, I'm breathing, and I'm thankful.
All right, nice. My name is Ricardo Ignacio, and I was born in Mexico. A lot of people that are not born in Mexico, but are Mexican descent, born in the U.S., say that, or tend to say that in Mexico we don't see race and we don't see color because we're all just Mexican. And that, me as a Mexican living in the US, that sounds a little too familiar from what I hear white folks say here, that we're all American and that's it. So the only people in this country, in the United States, that see color and see race are people of color, because we are affected by colorism in a negative way. Meanwhile, white folks are affected in the right way because they are the standard of beauty. So they're never considered the inferior and things of that nature. Now, in Mexico, same thing. The white people of Mexico are the ones who tend to say things like, there is no race and there is no color in Mexico because we're all just Mexicans. Well, there's a misconception in Mexico, and the misconception is that Mexican is a race when it's not. It's a nationality, in fact. And I've also noticed that a lot of people in the United States that are Mexican descent, they tend to feel entitled to the title of Mexican as if it belonged to them, as if it belongs to a certain look. To be Mexican, you have to look a certain way, right? Well, that's not so. If you were to turn on any Mexican channel, you open up any magazine in Mexico, all you see is white people on it. On TV, all you see is white people. All the actors, all the news anchors, etc. They're all white folks. In the magazines, they're all white folks. Now, here's the thing. The reason why in Mexico it is very well known that we say things like there is no color and there is no race is because white people want you to believe that. The people in control in Mexico want you to believe that there is no race and there is no color. That way, when a people cry about discrimination, their voices are immediately suppressed because it's like, okay, what are you crying about if we're all just Mexican? Mm-hmm. What is it exactly that you're complaining about? If there is no color, we're all just Mexicans. So it's much more difficult for a people that are oppressed, that are discriminated against systemically, to have a voice if their cry is due to colorism or racism. How could you cry about something when these two things supposedly don't exist? How are you going to cry about racism? How are you going to cry about colorism if they do not exist?
Yeah.
So
pretty deep.
Yeah.
I'm on to interject because I wanted to know how you felt when I first, not to throw you off from where you're going, but I wanted to know how you felt when I first came to you about this topic. We can get to that later, though.
How I felt about you coming to me about the topic?
Exactly.
Well, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because most of the people, at least on TikTok and Facebook, that support me, if you will, that understand where I'm coming from, are Black people. Mm-hmm. Because in this country, the people that are discriminated the most are Black people, and they know all about colorism. They know exactly what's going on. So in non-Black people culture, we, and I include me, Mexican people, Indian people, Chinese people, Black people have a reputation of being the people who are always complaining, always crying about things. So every time that Black people are on TV complaining about some kind of systemic injustice, anything of that nature, it had to be a Black person, always crying, always complaining, right?
And when you say that's a weak cop out for the person that's, oppressing, the person that's enforcing that evil onto a person of melanated color, because we can't really even say it's a racial thing, right?
Right.
To some degree it is, but there's melanated beings all across the board, all throughout the world, right? Mm-hmm. In every race.
Well, let me say this. So Black people have a reputation of being the ones always complaining, always crying about things, right? Now, here's the thing. The reason that this country, the U.S., is where it's at in regards to progress regarding racism and colorism, is due to Black people crying and complaining all the time, because Black people have been the ones to always jump in the fire, if you will, always the ones to fight these battles. And the outcome of fighting these battles, whether you bring up the civil rights movement, whatever it is that you want to bring up, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, whoever you want to bring up, the Black person to bring up, they always throw themselves in the fire, right? So due to that, the result of that has always been a lot of Black people end up in prison and end up dead. Now, the outcome as a whole, due to the sacrifices that Black people have made, is all of us get to benefit from that. The rights that Black people have fought to earn and to force this country to make, we all benefit from them. Mm-hmm. All of us. So meanwhile, we're over here sitting on the sidelines, calling Black people the crybabies and the ones always complaining, but yet all the sacrifices that Black people have made and all the results that have come out of their crying and complaining, we've all benefited from them. So now How is this relevant at all to Mexico? A lot. Watch, because in Mexico we don't cry enough, we don't complain enough, and so if you go to Mexico, it's equivalent to as if we were living in the 1950s here, because there is no progress when it comes to racism and color. There is absolutely no progress. There's signs in Mexico. Promise you, if people go to Mexico, there's signs. It's more so in tourist locations. There is signs that say things along the lines of, in order to acquire this position, this job, you must have light skin and green or blue eyes.
Wow.
Meaning you must have European features. So see, those type of signs existed in the US until black people began to fight back. In the US, you had water fountains for blacks, non for whites, non-whites. You know, buses, blacks go to the back of the bus. Schools, only whites, others. So all these things that we had in the 1950s, 60s, black people had to fight these things because nobody else fought them. Nobody else. And when black people were fighting these things, all of the rest of us were calling them people who complain, but yet they fixed the problems. That's the irony of it all. Is we
Yeah, and
call
it's really no irony. Here's the thing, in my opinion, because hey, I'm black. You know, I dealt with some, so I have some stories to tell. Okay.
Go ahead.
There's a lot of people who, number one, they just don't care. If it doesn't affect them, why would they care? If they're light enough to, you know, get into higher places with not that much backlash or oppression or attitudes, like black people, we deal with it all. Like we don't, it doesn't just stop at work, right? In regular society, we have to deal with just, you know, minuscule biases that really affect us in a major way for some. You know, and then some of us, we've learned to adapt and just get past it. We have strong enough mindsets, but all in all, the way we're treated is just still unfair in 2023, right?
Absolutely.
And you were saying how there's signs up in Mexico that, you know, basically it doesn't allow everyone a fair opportunity at employment, and that's just crazy to me. And I can't say that that doesn't exist here, because here when we fill out applications, we still have to distinguish or classify ourselves as one race over the other, or two or more races. Even they even have that option now. So if it didn't matter, why does it matter? Right? And then statistically speaking, from the Latino and Latina point of view, just based on this research I looked over a few nights ago, it's with Pew Research Organization. This was a document or a research paper over a majority of Latinos. They were talking about skin color and how it impacts their opportunity right here in America. So it's not an article or a research paper about Mexico, but they're talking about how it translates over to a new country. And 62% of these Latino that were surveyed, they stated that skin color absolutely has everything to do with whether or not you're going to be able to get ahead in life.
Yep, I agree, and I've experienced it, obviously. But here's the difference, though, in why I say that we're behind. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist in this country. What I am saying is that in Mexico is blatant, is open. Here,
it's overt. It's overt.
Absolutely. So absolutely, there's colorism here. Absolutely, there's racism here. However, in Mexico, it's like in the old days of the United States. Over there, it's open. It's open, and the worst part is it's normal. It's been normalized because there is no color in Mexico and there is no race. We're all just Mexican. You know how damaging that is?
Oh yeah, I do. Listen, I know it's like that there, and it's also like that in South America, like places like Brazil. I have friends there that are from there, and they come here to America and they say, I had one to say, if I cover my eyes and I talk to this person, how do I know that she's white and I know that you're black? And I was like, you can't go around in America saying that. I understood what she was saying, right? Dialect wise, we're talking about segregation that existed here not too long ago. All of that plays a role as to why we sound different, we act different, we eat differently. There's a lot of variations here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in Mexico, my first experience with colorism, I must have been no older than 5 years of age.
Wow.
And it was the moment that one of my little cousins was born. When he was born, he was light skinned. And in my culture, I'm considered dark skinned, right? So when this little boy my little cousin was born, he was a little white boy, right? And so the reaction of my grandmother was, in Spanish, of course, she said, "Oh my God, look how beautiful he is. He's so white like an angel."
Oh, wow.
Okay, now, if there is no colorism, then why does it matter what color this kid is? And why do you identify beauty in his whiteness?
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
Right. So now with that, what did I do? What did I do to my psyche as a 5-year-old? I did a lot. One, it allowed me to understand, oh, so that's how you determine what beautiful is. So since I'm not that, I could never look like that. That means what? That I can never be beautiful. So that already formed a complex, a sense of inferiority.
Mm-hmm.
There's no, so that's beautiful, huh? That's something to awe about. If that's the case, where does that leave people like me, right? So once again, when they say there is no color, what do you call that, right? So me growing up, one of the things that angered my mother the most was me being in the sun too much. Why?
Because she didn't want you to get darker.
Exactly. So she'll tell me, especially in the summers, if I'm out playing ball in the front, get your butt inside now. You're getting blacker, right? So because I noticed that it angered her that I was getting darker. Whenever she would make me angry for whatever reason, I would take my shirt off and I would stand in the sun so the sun could hit me
I'm
and I
done.
could get darker, right? So
Yeah.
that would anger her so much. Now here is a double-edged sword though, because although I succeeded in making her mad because I got darker, the problem was that I also suffered.
Right.
Because I got darker. Because I went inside, although I'm 1 or 2 tones darker, I saw it in the mirror and I saw ugly. Right?
Wow.
Yeah.
So as a result of everything that you were taught growing up from your young adolescence, you had developed already this
Absolutely.
bias and prejudice towards yourself, like this lack of self-love, right? So this, guys, I mean, Arthur Ricardo is really telling us something here. This stuff is racism, any isms are being taught at a very young age. That's the reason why they're never going away. Because you have parents that are constantly repeating the toxic cycle, right? It's never ending.
Now I go inside after getting a tone or 2 darker and I look in the mirror. And I don't like what I see, right? So I'm in the bathtub grabbing one of those metal sponges that my mom uses for the washing dishes, and I'm scrubbing my black knees trying to get the blackness off of me. And because I've noticed that my mother used bleach to whiten the clothes, instead of soap, I use bleach to scrub my body. All right? So I learned this in Mexico. So when they say there is no colorism in Mexico, my question is, then what do you call this?
Right.
What do you call this? Right?
Yep.
So now let me dive a little deeper. And this is perhaps, it's going to be too complex for a lot of people because more so in this country, we have been conditioned to think that Mexican is in fact a race. Right? So now let me explain how it's not. first and foremost, Mexico is a country. It's a nationality. In order to be Mexican and to identify as a Mexican, you must be born there. Just like in Canada, you cannot be, I'm not half Canadian, half Mexican. That means nothing. You can't be two countries. You're either born there or you're born here, right? Now, with that said, the reason why we're all Mexican in Mexico, because we are in fact are all Mexicans. Because by nationality, rightfully so, we all in fact are all Mexican, absolutely. But we identify as a nationality. Mexican is not a race. Now, watch. Mexico is made of by diverse people of different cultures. There is black people there. Let me be more specific. There's African descendants, Asian descendants, European descendants, and then there's the indigenous people there, right? Now, here's what happened and how we all became Mexican. Once upon a time, couple hundred years, not that long ago, somewhere along the lines of 1820-ish, people were still identifying by their Native American tribes in Mexico, like Zapotec, Mixtec, Nahuatl, etc., right? And the Afro-Mexicans, as they identify themselves, meaning the African descendants that also have communities in Mexico that you will never see on TV, they also identify with a certain ethnic identity. However, the government of Mexico, the white people of Mexico, decided to prohibit people from identifying with their native tribes. I come from a people known as Chichimeca, spoke Nahuatl. My grandmother spoke Nahuatl as a first language. That's the Native American language in Mexico, right? So I come from a people who identified by tribe. Like me, I wasn't born in a city. I was born in a village, right? So the people I come from, they built their house with their bare hands. And they didn't, the government doesn't even acknowledge those addresses. We don't have addresses, right? So with that said, the Mexican government, which is controlled by white people, of course, forced or prohibited all people to no longer identify by their indigenous tribes and no longer speak the native languages. We all have to now identify as Mexican and forced to only speak Spanish, which obviously is the language of the Spaniard colonizers.
Yes.
Right?
I'm so glad you touched on that. Yes.
Check this out. So the fact that these white folks, the Spaniards, forced us all to no longer identify by our native tribes and speak our native languages, that is another form of ethnic cleansing, ethnic erasure. So you mean to tell me that these people came in the early 1500s and violently killed as many of us as possible, right? And after they saw that some of us still lived, they said, okay, we couldn't kill all these people. How could we erase them? Well, let's prevent them from identifying with their native identity and also stop speaking the native languages. And now we're going to force them to all identify as Mexican and speak Spanish. So now, a couple hundred years later, we have a bunch of Native Americans talking about, I'm Hispanic, I'm Spanish. Well, of course, you have a Spanish last name, you speak Spanish. What else are you going to think you are? We have been ethnically cleansed. Now, if that isn't the prime example of racism, you tell me what is. You tell me what is. So when you tell me there is no race and no color in Mexico, the fact that we identify all as Mexican is the prime example of racism. That is a systemic effort to erase, ethnically cleanse a people and force them to identify by what the white man wanted you to identify as. We speaking Spanish because that is the language of the white people in Mexico. So literally our conditions as Mexicans is the prime example of racism and colorism.
Oh, I love it. You said that so beautifully. And Black people of African descent can most definitely relate
Of
because yeah,
course,
the same thing happened to us. Yeah.
of course.
Like we don't know our tribes. A lot of us are trying to catch up using these DNA places like Ancestry and 123 or 23andMe.
Sure.
I don't know. That's no jab to those corporations. They're doing whatever they do. But the fact of the matter is, yeah, like we've been ethnically cleansed as well. And some of us don't even realize it. Some of us are just identifying as straight American when we have lineage going straight to Benin or Nigeria or Abuja. Hey, anybody that's listening, you know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
So there's and in other places, as well. Ivory Coast. I mean, it spans all over. Africa's huge. Yeah.
Sure.
Even some of the what we call Mexicans today, some of their lineage goes back to there. So because at some point everything was Pangea. We have to think about that as well. So moving forward, I'm smiling because you said it best. We're like ducks walking around with frog heads. We think we're frogs. And that's because we've been programmed to believe ribbit, ribbit, jump around, but know you're a duck. You know what I'm saying? Like we don't even know who we are. That's why it's important that we do our research. That's the reason why it's important that we try to hear each other, no matter what race, culture, or religion we're coming from. We need to hear each other's stories and try to piece all of this together because it's been purposely dismantled so that we are left to try to put those puzzle pieces, I should say, back together. Going back, I wanted to touch a little bit back on these stats about how color really does affect your success in Mexico, as you just mentioned, also in America, and I'm pretty sure many other countries around the world. A lot of people get caught up thinking that colorism is just something that we talk about or deal with here in America. We forget about Mexico. There's tons of melanated Hispanics and Mexican, or I should say indigenous American people, because you guys are American too. We're forgetting that as well, right? Words matter. But on the same token, we want to talk a little bit about those that are lighter skinned. So based on the stats with Pew Research, I wanted to comment on this, that about 48% of those that were surveyed stated that on the lighter end of the spectrum, 48% of the lighter skinned Latinos stated that discrimination was based on race, origin, and played a very huge portion of why they were successful. Absolutely. And I think it's utterly ridiculous. We're talking about pigmentation, people. We're talking about melanin carbon. You do your research. We're basing success based on that, not on what a person knows, not on what a person can produce, not where their heart really lies. That's what we've come down to, right? So this is something that is a very cliche topic, but it's very necessary to talk about because melanated individuals are being discriminated against every single day. It's no longer a myth. It's all over the news, right? It's all over the news. It's undeniable.
Yeah.
So the question is, what ways can melanated individuals mitigate the severe oppression that they deal with on a daily basis? Like, what are some tips that you can give Black people, Hispanic people, even Indians, right? They deal with this too.
Of course. Well, before that, let me share a little story here. Just to champion more the or at least the let me debunk the misconception when Mexican people say that there is no colorism in Mexico. I have a friend that was raised in California where I'm at, and she's Black, right? She now lives in Mexico, and she's been traveling Mexico. She lives there now. That's her home now, and she's been going back and forth different states in Mexico. And she said to me, I can't help to notice the fact that every time I turn the TV on here or open up a magazine, it's all white people. It's all white people. But then when I come out in the streets, it's all indigenous people that look just like you, Ricardo. But on TV, you wouldn't even think that people like you exist. Now, with that said, for the brown people that's going to be watching this, the Mexicans or Mexican Americans that are going to be watching this, if you firmly believe that colorism doesn't exist in Mexico, let me give you a great example, a big example. Very recently, since this is Black History Month and since the movie Wakanda Forever just came out, I want to bring something up real quick. Very important. The character of the anti-hero, who was an indigenous man, a Native American from Mexico. His real name in real life is Tenoch Huerta. Tenoch is an indigenous name, by the way. The man that you see there, that is the real original Mexican, right? Now, you turn on any Mexican TV channel, you don't see anyone that looks like that on Mexican. You're just not going to see it. Now, with that said, when he played that role on the Wakanda Forever, shout out to the writers and the producers of Wakanda, because they're black. They're black. Ryan Coogler, I believe, the director, as well as co-writer, his name is, of Wakanda Forever. Shout out to him, because if it were not for him, indigenous people of Mexico will still have no presence on the big screen. We have not been non-existent rather, on the big screen in this country. All that you see that represents Mexican people are the white ones, right? So with that said, shout out to those guys. But with that said, Wakanda Forever, you have this indigenous man as the anti-hero. Now, the interesting part, just for the Mexicans that say there is no colorism in Mexico, the interesting part is that when he was chosen to be in this big film, the reaction of Mexican media was, he is not the proper representation of Mexico. That's Mexican media, not here media. Mexico's media was, he is not the proper representation of Mexico. Now, why? Well, because what is the proper representation of Mexico when you turn on the TV and when you open up Mexico magazines? It's white people. So, of course, he is not the proper representation of Mexico. The only people that had a problem with this brown man being the face of what's going to represent the people of Mexico are Mexican people. But let me be specific. The white people of Mexico had a problem, because the white people, the white people in control of Mexico, of the media, etc., they're the ones who make the systemic effort to make sure that what represents Mexico, it's a pale face, European featured person. And they've been pushing this for decade after decade after decade. So now, when, although these are the same people that say color doesn't exist and race doesn't exist, only we're all Mexican, but yet when this brown indigenous man who gets on there speaking a native language gets on this thing, what do they say? The people who say color and race don't exist, they say what? That is not the proper representation of Mexico. Okay, so then what is? If there is no color and there is no race, why is this brown skin man a problem? Because
it's, well, and here's the thing, and this is why it's so important, in my opinion. Just like it goes back to your story about when you were a child. Absolutely. And the woman in your family, I think you say your aunt or your grandma, somebody important in your family stated, your grandmother stated that your baby cousin was beautiful because he had a lighter shade.
Sure.
This also directly goes back to media and how media affects your mind, people. Yep. You can't always believe what you see. Sounds very strange, but it's true. You have to go out and view and experience life for yourself. And I've been to Mexico a few times, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Over here on the big screen, we don't see a lot of people that look your shade color or my shade color, because you guys are a beautiful melting pot, just like America, because after all, you're attached to us, right? You are us, right? We are you. But I just think it's wild. It's wild that you're telling me this and that it's 2023, right? And this is still going on. This is still happening, and it's so much self-hate that's coming out of this, right?
I don't wanna ruffle feathers, but at the same time I do. I don't want to make people uncomfortable, but at the same time I do. So I'm going to say this. You said that in Mexico we're a beautiful melting pot. There's nothing beautiful about it. There's not, because the indigenous people and black people of Mexico are the ones who are always discriminated against, and the white people are not. So there's nothing beautiful about diversity when a certain people are discriminated against systemically, meanwhile the others are triumphing due to this discrimination. We have a system, just like in the US, a system built by whites to benefit whites at the expense of non-whites. That's the same thing in Mexico. So that's the reason why when you turn on the TV, Mexico TV, Mexican channels, and open up Mexican magazines, all you see is white folks, right? So the crazy part, and where I'm going to say that there is no beautiful melting pot, there's nothing beautiful about it. When the Spaniards arrived, they obviously brought slaves, African slaves over, right? So I only say that to say this. Black people have been existing in Mexico just as long as white people. Just as long. Just as long. Not only that, but a lot of the slaves in the United States, because at this particular time, slavery in Mexico was over. For the people who don't think that indigenous people and black people were slaves in Mexico, there were. But they ended slavery long ago, before the U.S. or the U.S. still had slavery going on. Mexico was already done with that. So because that was so, when the U.S. still had slavery going on, there was a lot of runaway slaves who fled to Mexico. And a lot of the black people that fled to Mexico, they obviously settled there, built their families, their communities, whoop-de-whoop, right? So hundreds of years later, whether it was African descent people who've been there when the Spaniards dragged them there, or the runaway slaves, either way, the point that I want to make is that black people, African descent people, have been existing in Mexico, Central and South America before, just as long as the Europeans that arrived here and colonized, etc. Right? So I say this to say something important that I need people to understand. So when you turn on the TV, Mexico TV magazines, I'm gonna ask you personally, have you ever in your whole life, when you think of Mexican, have you ever thought of someone that looks like you?
Initially, no, but now in my adult life, yes, right? But as a younger American kid, no, we didn't see that. In fact, when I first encountered someone that looked like me that spoke pure Spanish, I was like, I had that shock factor, right? Because I hadn't been exposed to it.
Mm-hmm. So, although black people have been existing in Mexico just as long as white people have, you don't see black people on TV, in Mexico TV, in Mexico magazines. So there's plenty of black communities in Mexico. Plenty. But where are they? Because if you turn on the TV to check what a Mexican looks like, what the Mexican media, etc., what is it that you see? How come you don't see a black person that looks like you?
Oh, well, you already know why.
Okay. So
the same reason why you don't see a lot of us in leadership here, right?
Right.
We're starting to slowly trickle in, but gosh, look how long it's been.
Okay, right? Now, yeah, sure. Now, with that said, but yet you see white people. Not only do you see white people on Mexican TV and in magazines, but it's 99% of what you see. And the very few times that you see a brown skin person on the TV in Mexico, it's because they work as in the background in gardeners, some kind of inferior position, a maid, something lowly, right? But when it comes to black folk community in Mexico, you do not see any of their representation of Mexico. You will never see a spokesman of Mexico be a black person. Not gonna see it. Not gonna see it. You'll never see, turn on the TV Mexico channel and see a Mexican talking on behalf of Mexico looking like you. But yet, people like you have been in Mexico just as long as the white folks. So when they say there is no colorism and no racism, come on. Come on.
You know, I'll take it a step further. You know, we were talking about how this is ingrained, unfortunately, into the youth at a very young age. And you guys are our kids, your kids, everyone's kids have learned to accept such a horrifying dividing evil that exists worldwide, right? I've noticed kids, you know, in predominantly Hispanic classrooms, because I had an era where I was teaching at a particular school, and I've witnessed some crazy things. You know, I've witnessed darker skinned Latinos that were asked by lighter skinned Latinos to pick up the cotton that's on the floor, right? Things like that. And it puts me in a shock, because I'm like, wow, we're still talking like this. You know, we're past the year 2020. Why are we still on this? Why is this the focal point, right? And I think that's the question that we have to ask ourselves. We have to make sure that we're checking with our family members as well as the children in our family. These are the kind of conversations like we're having, you and I, that need to be had within families. And I'm noticing something. When I did my research, I noticed that based on this survey of Latinos that I told you about with Pew Research Center, they asked these Latinos, like, when they were growing up, how often did they talk about the challenges that they would face based on their skin color, you know, whether they're dark or light. And so for the lighter skin Latinos, it was almost never talked about.
Yeah.
Like 48% of them said, oh yeah, we didn't talk about that. That was not even something that was concerning. But 8% of that same group said, yeah, we talked about it often. Now for the darker skinned Latinos, they said they talked about it all the time. It was like about 38%. They're talking about it every other day or once a week, or, you know, whenever some major life decision needs to be made, they always remind their kid that, you know, remember, you know, you're dark skinned. So you have to watch what you say. You have to pay attention to the way you dress, how you act. And that's crazy that kids with darker hues have to be given extra rules just to live their life like anybody else.
Yeah, sure. When I was a kid, you know, in regards to, you know, my little cousin being born a light-skinned boy, after, you know, it didn't take long for me to notice how the light-skinned cousins were treated much better than the dark-skinned ones, you know. Living in the U.S. and growing up in predominantly black neighborhoods, I got to see similar things in black communities. Very similar, very similar. I paid attention to the fact that a very large percentage of black males go for light-skinned women, specifically in their words, the snow bunny, right? So me growing up in black neighborhoods, predominantly black neighborhoods, I was easily embraced by black people. Easily. That's the reason why most of the women I've been with, relationships wise, have been black, because me, as you know, although black people probably look at me, they don't consider me dark skinned. In my culture, I am considered dark skinned. So black, because I'm the dark skin, I was able to relate more with black people, struggle wise. So one of the first video games that I played, that as a kid, that I felt a connection to, was an old game known as Streets of Rage. The reason why that game was important to me was because it was the first time I seen a black character in there. So it was a black dude, right? And the rest of the characters were all white, but then this one was black. And this is the first time in my whole life that I seen someone that looks like me. You understand? So I chose this character, and for once in my life, I felt connected somehow to this video game character. And as I was maneuvering this character through the levels, I could finally see that I'm in that game, right? So prior to that, I have had to imagine that I'm white. Do you understand how what's going on here? So prior to that, I have had to relate to white folks because I had no other choice. So finally, when there's a black character, I'm like, oh, click, select. This actually feels different to control a black character. Now something's happening here. You understand? Just like, I'm gonna be completely honest with you, and people need to take note of these things because they're important. As a kid, we grew up watching cartoons. All the characters are white characters, whatever, right? But the first time I seen myself on TV was when I seen the original cartoon, The Jungle Book, right? Because although I'm not Indian or whatever that character is, I think they're from India, right? Although I'm not Indian, I saw myself because it's a brown kid. So the effect that this had on my psyche to see someone that looks like me, it was very, very important. Now, I say that to say this. It is important that we depict ourselves as powerful entities. I personally, for what it's worth to the black people, to black communities, for what it's worth, I hope they don't take offense to it because I mean well when I say this. I hope that black people stop creating films depicting themselves as slaves. I hope that black people stop, because you asked me what the solution was, right? We still have a sense of inferiority, and we look at white folks as superior. You look at white heroes, they're all gods. We're not gods. We have come to comprehend decade after decade that they are gods. All right? Thor, Spider-Man, they're all white gods. Okay? They have supernatural powers. They're superior beings. When I seen the Wakanda Forever is the first time in my entire existence in the history of cinema that I seen a brown man as a god. An indigenous, specifically indigenous man who looks like me, who has my complexion, who comes from our indigenous root, who is a god. See, for the people who don't know, although this character's name is Namor, he also is known in the movie as Kukulkan. For the people who don't know, Kukulkan is a real entity in our culture. Kukulkan, for lack of better terms, is a god in our culture, right? So when I watched Wakanda the first time, I watched this movie not knowing absolutely nothing of what this movie is about, because I watched it with my girlfriend at that time, Jamaican girl, right? She like, let's watch Wakanda Forever. I'm like, okay, let's watch it. So we're watching it. I seen this brown character. I was like, oh, okay. So I was thrown off a little bit. And all of a sudden, I hear him say these words. I said, my enemies know me as Namor, but my loved ones know me as Kukulkan. When he said that, I was like, what did he just say? Because the book that I wrote it some years back. The image on the front logo is Kukulkan. Okay? So when I got this character in a freaking Hollywood movie saying my loved ones know me as Kukulkan, the effects that they had on my brain, I said, let's go. Let's go. Because this is the proper representation of us. And that's the reason why the white folk in Mexico, that is not the proper representation of Mexico, because I know that they heard that word Kukulkan. Hey, in the Wakanda movie, one of the Africans or one of the Wakandans, the big buff guy, he says this in the meeting. He says, His people didn't identify him as general. They identified him as Kukul Khan. You don't think we read books over here? When he said that, I was like, bingo. Because what that Wakandan individual, the big dude, what he said was that he learned what Kukulkan is by reading books. If you read books in our culture, you know exactly what Kukulkan is, right? So when white folks, the Spaniards that tried to destroy us, hear this, and a movie is making a big old statement. No, that is not the proper representation of Mexico. Of course, you're going to say that. These are the people that you tried to destroy. Now, let me just finish up before you go ahead and say what you're going to say, right? So now, I was saying, I hope that Black people stop creating films depicting themselves as slaves, depicting themselves as gang members, as drug dealers, and things of that nature that encourage us to be so. The slave movies, I feel like they're subliminally teaching Black people that that's your beginning, when in fact that it's not. What the gangbanger movies are teaching Black people are the ones that are already so. It's encouraging them to continue, because no matter what your message in that movie is, whether it's Boys in the Hood, Menace to Society, I don't care if it's a positive message in the end. I don't care. Young people only know how to glorify the gangster. They don't know how to get that whatever message you posit doesn't exist. When I first seen Menace to Society as a kid, I promise you, all of us watching it, all we cared about is O-Dog, because he's the real gangster. Everybody else is a weenie. You understand? So O-Dog is who we looked up to. See, whatever message you had in the end, you should. We didn't care. We watched this because O-Dog. You get me? Now, with that said, why Wakanda movie is powerful? Because Black people, in my opinion, from the outside looking in, need to start depicting themselves as gods. That's what y'all need to do, because that's the reason why white people have so much confidence in themselves, why they feel superior. See, the thing about white people is they know that we all look at them as superior, and they also know, aside from them looking down at us as inferior, they also know that we think we're inferior. See, it's because the decade, century after century, they've been gods. We've been slaves in the movies, right? So we need to erase the way we depict ourselves. We need to stop depicting ourselves as slaves, as gangsters, as drug dealers. Stop glorifying that. We should depict ourselves as gods from here on out only. And if not that, if we want to make real movies, why don't you make a movie about a full family with a Black father, a Black mother who raised their children correctly, instead of glorifying the brokenness? We know we're broken already. Okay, we got it. We know we come from slaves. Got you. We weren't slaves once upon a time. Got you. I got you. We know. Now start depicting the solution. What would you like to put in our brains? What images now would you like us to desire and aim for? Right? Because
me too, Robert.
I think it's a huge issue to continue depicting ourselves as inferior, self-destructive people. The slave image is horrible. It's horrible for our psyche. The gang and drug dealer image is horrible. I don't care, once again, what end message you got. It don't matter. The youth only know how to glorify this. That's all we know how to do. I speak from a place of experience. Growing up in Black neighborhoods, when we watch one of these movies, don't matter what it was, American Gangster, Menace to Society, we turn it on to see the real G.
And here's the thing, you hit it on the nail. I'm glad you actually went back and answered my question, because we focus so much time on, this is the problem. oh, this is what's going on. Racism, colorism, can't find a job, being discriminated against. We know that, we see that people are literally dying as a result of it. But the real question we should be asking ourselves is, how do we create a steady solution to these issues? Because we can find solutions. Robert says here, I would honestly love to see us create more Black sci-fi. Wouldn't it be awesome to see a fantasy movie with all Black cast based in Africa? Absolutely. I'm telling you it would. And a lot of these, it's funny that we're talking about movies and we're relating it to real life, because a lot of these movies really transcend from history. Sure. African history, I would say indigenous American history. A lot of these tales that we're hearing and we're thinking of it as unrealistic or fictitious, a lot of that has some truth, underlying truth in every single film that you see. Mm-hmm. And I love the fact that you said, Ricardo, that we as melanated beings should think of ourselves as gods. I agree. Yeah. And we definitely have to stop all the slave films, because me personally, I'm tired of seeing it. All of the spectacular TV shows that I've seen as of recent, like Lovecraft Country. There's another one called Kindred. Kindred had a lot of heavy slavery connotation depicted in that TV show, but it also didn't get another season. It was a spectacular, I think, script that was put together, and a lot of people should check it out while it's still on Hulu, but unfortunately it's not going forward. Lovecraft Country was amazingly brilliant. I mean, Robert, since you're talking about sci-fi, I encourage you to watch Lovecraft Country if you haven't seen it already. It was primarily an all-Black cast, and it uprooted a lot of deep, dark African American and African indigenous history. So definitely tap into that. All my listeners, tap into that if you guys are interested in that genre of TV show. Now, Ricardo, man, I knew you would, though. You dropped a lot of gems for us, and I really appreciate your transparency about colorism in Mexico. Now, some people have never been there, and there's some people who may even have indigenous roots from that area. I think it's important, guys, that are listening in today, that you do your research on yourself. You find out who you really are. Find out what your lineage is. Don't just give up because you say, oh, I have a broken home. I grew up with a single parent, whether it's a father or a mother. You find out who you are, because I promise you, when you tap into that, that's when that empowerment seeps back into your soul. You can't be empowered if you don't know who you are. You can't be empowered if you don't know what you are, because you're not going to know where you're going, right? So you have to have some clear path or idea of who you are first, so that way you'll know which way to go. You'll find your purpose in all of this. A lot of people get down. A lot of people feel helpless. I've noticed that, because it's been programmed in you since you were a child to think that way of yourself. So let's work on the deprogramming, guys. There's a great book out right now called Decolonization of the Mind. All right. If you can find that, it's out there on Amazon. It is a great book to read. Make sure you check out Ricardo's books as well. I've had it streaming. I'm going to put it down there again here. Could you want to tell us a little bit about your book?
One of the books, at least, that I'm promoting right now is titled Los Sin Dios. It's a Spanish title, but it's an English book. The reason why I title it Los Sin Dios, it means the godless, like the people without God, okay? Or without God. Now, the reason why this was important to me was because when the Spaniards came, they were Catholic people, and they killed us in the name of their God, because they saw us as less than humans because we didn't worship their God, right? And so when they were killing us, indigenous people, they were saying to us that they were going to save our souls by killing us in the name of their God, their Jesus, right? So with that said, that's the reason why I named it that, Los Sin Dios, and I'm using that specific phrase, right? Now, what the book is about is pretty much, the timeline is when Christopher Columbus first arrived to the islands of the Americas, and then the book walks you through from then to then Cortez arriving to Mexico, and the massacres, the ethnic cleansing, the forced assimilation, etc. And then it leads you to ultimately to the Mexican and the condition of the Mexican today, and why we, although we're indigenous people, we are known as the immigrants, right? So it is a book of being ultimately the indigenous people who now, when you see on TV and they talk about immigration, they show a guy that looks like this, the indigenous people, right? So I find it ironic. And the funny part was that I wrote that book and I put it in the vault for 2 years because I was a little bit afraid that this book was going to damage me more than it was going to help me in life. Because I had already published the book, and I wanted to go that route in my career as an author, a more all humans could relate to my stories rather than using my talents to uplift my people, something that could be considered, oh, this guy is one of those, oh, he's using the race card. But what caused me to publish it was I don't watch TV, right? I don't care for it. But there's only one thing that I do, not anymore, but at that particular time, because I used to be in theater. I used to be in plays, theatrical plays, etc. Right? That was one of my passions. So when I was home and I wasn't working on writing and doing what I do, I used to turn on the only one channel that was an arts channel. That's all that I turn on the TV for, just to watch art, right? And a lot of the times I see live performances on stage, theatrical plays, things that I used to do too. I love watching people perform because I know how difficult it is, right? So in one day that I turn on that channel, the norm of the arts aspect of the channel wasn't airing. It was a paid program. You know how they have paid programs sometimes, like trying to sell a product. Sometimes the paid program is by a church, and they have a church session, if you will. This particular program, when I turned it on, I was like, oh man, I wanted to watch it, play, but for whatever reason, when I turned it on, what came out of this white man, a preacher, this Christian's mouth, he said something along the lines of this. When the white man arrived to Mexico, Moctezuma, which is the name of one of the emperors in Mexico, of the Aztec Empire, Moctezuma had predicted the arrival of the white man. They've been waiting for our arrival because it was in their prophecy, our prophecy, for them to rule us. When I heard this man say that, he was attempting to justify the forcing of Christianity against people. So what he's saying is, even in our own prophecies, we prophesied that they were going to come and introduce their new world onto us, and it was part of our destiny. Not because they say, although they do, because we've been waiting for the new world to arrive. Now, when I heard this man say this, it did something to me. I said to myself, sir, whatever fantasies that you had about being this great writer that writes these beautiful stories, you are doing yourself and your people a huge disservice. There is no way that you could close your eyes to what's going on, to the agenda of these people, and skip around whistling Dixie in this world while you're getting screwed as a whole. There's no way, sir, that you have these talents so that you could use them to pretend like there's nothing happening. So when I seen this man open his mouth, fix his mouth to say these things, I said, oh, sir, you have just opened Pandora's box. So I went to my vault, so to speak, and pulled out that manuscript and said, like Bugs Bunny said one time, I hope you know this means war. So that was my attitude. I said, I got you, sir. I got you. That's where we're going, huh? You are trying to justify what you did to us, huh? I got you. I got you. So from then on, this is who I've become. Whatever the outcome it may be, out of my individual life, I am fine, because him saying that is very hurtful. It's very hurtful, not to my emotions, not to my feelings. It's very hurtful for the people that they have ruined. Very hurtful. So you mean to tell me that you've raped, slaughtered, and centuries of killing people, and now all you've got to say is they prophesied it?
And they
This
were
was
waiting for this
destiny?
to happen. Yeah, exactly.
You, meaning you are justifying this mess? Sir, I'm sorry, but I've got something to say. And so I published that book. I had to reveal the evils that these people did, and the outcome of what happens when a people have been, as I said in the beginning, ethnically cleansed, forced to assimilate, suffering from acculturation, internalized racism. You ask an indigenous person today, hey, are you Native American? No, I'm Spanish. Because we are taught that our origins are inferior. I mean, our powers are so powerful that you ask white people today, white historians, who built the pyramids in Mexico. Oh, it was aliens. These people were not capable of building. So if you can't do it, neither could we. That's what you're saying, huh? Superior fucking race. Excuse my language.
No, you're fine. It's funny because I was just having this conversation with someone. I was like, oh yeah, and by the way, Martin Luther King was wrong. All men aren't created equal. But with that being said, listen, Arthur, Ricardo, you are amazing. I really, really thoroughly enjoyed this show today. We haven't even scratched the surface, guys, of so much history that needs to be told. We didn't even talk about how the slaves ran right past the South, straight to Mexico. Ricardo touched on it. That was back in the 1820s. You were dead on with the date. And I believe Mexico abolished slavery in 1829, which was 30 plus years before America did. So there's so much history that still needs to be taught, told, and expressed throughout our communities. And even to educate those white communities that simply don't know. And right now they simply don't care, but they should. Because at the end of the day, man, we all are living on this ball of dirt called Earth together. And we need to get ourselves collectively in alignment. We need to get our minds set on greatness. And in order for us to achieve that, we have to know who we are. So I want to thank you again, Arthur, Ricardo, for being on the show today. Again, guys, the topic of today's show was colorism in Mexico. Guys, make sure you like, share, comment, and subscribe. Make sure you get a copy of that book. It's streaming down below.
Could I end it with something?
Absolutely. Please.
So you mentioned that that a lot of slaves were, which is something we already talked about. Slaves ran to Mexico and things like that. I hope that Black people, and I don't like to come off like that because I don't want Black people to think I have a voice, that I'm in a sense the voice of Blacks. Not at all. I'm giving the same output that I will give to my people because we're on the same boat, right? So we need to stop using our platforms to glorify our self-destruction. You said something super important, so important right now. You said that, and white folks, y'all usually don't care, but you need to start caring. But we, as people of color, we need to stop hoping for them to care. And we need to start caring about ourselves, build our own communities, and more importantly, control our own media, our own narrative, and stop allowing outsiders to control, the colonizers to control our narrative, our media. You see, once upon a time, this is how I want to end it. Once upon a time in this country, in colonized countries, whether the US, Canada, Mexico, etc., once upon a time, we had no control. We had no say, so absolutely none. It was 100% control by the white man. The media what they say goes. Now, with the technology, the tools that we have, the social media, we have a say so. We have a voice. We have platforms. Now, the way I want to end it is this. Once upon a time, we didn't have a voice. The oppression that we faced was not televised. Now we have a voice. Now we have tools. Now what we say will be televised on here, right? With that said, I see a lot of black and brown people using these tools to strengthen the white man's agenda, to depict ourselves as clowns, as fools, to glorify our self-destruction, right? To use their platforms to strengthen and give more exposure to BS, right? See, someone like you is what we need. We need people like you to use our platforms to talk about these, to control the narrative, to say what's going on, to expose our problems, colorism, racism, and things of that nature. Once upon a time, the complaint of our ancestors, our grandparents, if you will, their complaint was, no one's listening. We don't have a voice. But now we have more than a voice. We have our own platforms. We dominate our platforms. And what do we do with them? We're doing nothing. We are glorifying our destruction. We are using these tools to further destroy ourselves. So now that we have these tools, we need to start using them to control the narrative. And because it's Black History Month, if you don't mind, I want to bring up something which is everybody hates except Black people, and it's reparations. When it comes to reparations, I want to ask you something. How much money did the U.S. give to what is the country that is being invaded by Russia right now? What is it called again?
Oh, Ukraine. I didn't even keep up with the millions that were given to them.
Okay.
Yeah, millions.
Billions, right? So the U.S. has been throwing billions of dollars away to them white folks over there. When white immigrants come from Europe to here, they get grants and things of that nature, right? Now, when COVID happened, the government was giving people free money, right? I say all that to say this. The reason they say that they can't do reparations is because they can't afford it. But yet, they're able to just throw billions of dollars to other countries all day. All day.
I just looked it up. It's $24.9 billion.
$24 billion to Ukraine. But we can't afford reparations, right? Now, a lot of Black people say things like, we need equality. Nah. No, we don't. What Black people need, in my opinion, and forgive me for being so raw, you need equity. Equity. Equality would mean that we all have equal rights. But if this were a game of Monopoly, meanwhile, y'all were slaves, white people have already owned all the property in the Monopoly board. So when they give you equality, you'll be free to run around and land under all their properties and pay them taxes and rent. So, no, that is the reason why reparations is very, very important and why they won't give it. Because reparations is affordable, money-wise, but it's not affordable to give to such a people. Because you give Black people the opportunity to catch up, y'all are a couple of 100 years behind. Okay? Meanwhile, white people were stealing all the land and all the resources. Y'all were in chains building this country for free. Right? if y'all were given your own state, free school, free healthcare, free everything, no tax, which you deserve, you enslaved these people for 300 plus years. And then you say you're free. Now you say, let's play even. There's no even. It's not an even playing field here. You own everything. You own everything already. How is this fair?
And for people who don't understand equity, because there's some people that listen in, they don't really understand some of the terms that we're using today. It's just in the case that, you know, person A is white. They make $100,000 a year, but they also have, let's say, $500,000 in investments, a little bit of that, $500,000 in their bank account, and some invested in real estate. While that black person is also making 100K, some would argue, oh, well, you're making $100,000. What are you complaining for? Well, I'm making $100,000 with about $20,000 in the bank account. There's a huge difference here, right? So person A has more financial freedom to invest, to rebuild, and even gain on the existing wealth of $500,000, while person B only has a 100K salary, and that's it, right? They're starting from the ground up. So that's what Arthur Ricardo is talking about when he says equity, and you're spot on. And it's refreshing to hear someone from another culture really tell the truth in full transparency.
If you, which I believe black people deserve this, but if foundational black Americans, if you want to give a true sense of equality, a sense of catching up to black people, you must exclude them from paying taxes, free healthcare, free school, only for them. And let's see how quick they progress, because people love to say that black people can't progress. Look, I don't care what kind of job you give to a black person. Name one black person in this country that owns a state or something like that owns anything here, that owns a piece of land. White people own the whole land. I want to see a whole state, Texas, for example. Give Texas to black people. Let that be their piece, where they go to school for free, free healthcare, no tax. Let them have their own monies there, their own businesses, etc., and they get to set up tourism for others to come in and buy, and etc. One last thing in regards to what I was saying, as far as controlling our own and having a voice and using it not to self-destruct, but to address issues. A lot of us, and I say mostly blacks, because black people are very popular people, as far as they know how to make things trend, they know how to popularize things. So what I want to say is, I wish and I hope to see black people stop promoting white brands so much. You have a lot of black celebrities. I don't care, basketball players, football players, rappers, singers, actors, and they promote the heck out of white brands, Gucci, whatever. Grab your own brands. Black people have so much power in the way they popularize and make things trend. We all want to dress like black people. We all want to act like black people. We all want to be black. And culturally, but just not.
Now, there you go. Without the black struggle. Let's keep it real.
There you go. So we all want to take the beautiful things about black people. Oh my God, black people are powerful. Black people, all of what's trending right now is due to black people. All of the brands, everything I could possibly wear right now is due to me being what is the word? Hold on. Not encouraged. Something along the lines of that. For lack of better words, encouraged. To wear dress the way that I do, whatever, is because of black people. It's black people trend, whether it's Kanye West, whatever, whoever you want to bring up.
We're the influencers of the planet.
That is the word.
I know that's the word you were looking for. Yeah.
There you go.
Because we are. Yeah, we are.
Thank you. Right.
We absolutely are. And it's no shade to any other
No, no, no,
cultures
no,
out
no,
there.
no,
It's just
no,
facts.
no,
It's
no.
just facts.
Let's be honest. Let's be honest. Everybody wants to be black, right? So everybody everybody wants to follow the trends of black people. Now, with that said, that means what? Black people have power. Black people have a lot of power. Unfortunately, we give all this power to bring wealth to white people. Why don't we create our own brands, our own T-shirt brands, our
You
own?
know why? Because
Come
we're
on.
not stopping and we're not thinking. We're not thinking
Okay.
about the strategy that has been in play for over 300 years. And that's the
Mhm.
thing about taking a pause, stepping back, and asking yourself, what am I doing? Where am I
Yeah.
spending my coins? Who am I influencing? How am I improving my life and the people around me? How am I educating myself about what's really going on in real time? Not to look back 30 years later and say, oh my God, I spent millions on Gucci and Prada.
Mhm.
I could have built my own brand, and look at me now. I'm weaning money off of Social Security and
Mhm.
Medicare. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on,
Absolutely.
people, you really seriously have the power. Like, Ricardo, you keep dropping major gems. And just to go back to your point when you said, why not give blacks like a state so they can just go to school free, no taxes, yada yada, this and that. We were building something like that.
Yeah.
It's
I'm
called
aware.
Black Wall Street.
I'm
So
aware.
we don't have enough time to talk about that today. We did that already. And there's many other little towns all across the United States that were literally either flooded out, slaughtered and massacred. And these are the histories, the stories that need to, these aren't stories, these are real life situations that need to be echoed within the communities and also in the school systems. But as if you've noticed as of late, within the last 2 years, they've worked very hard to get Black history out of the school system. Ask yourself why. It's not because we're tired of talking about slavery. They don't want you to know about the triumphs, the victories that Black people actually achieved in the midst of slavery and severe oppression and constant raping of our Black women and our Black men. Don't leave them out. Buck breaking. There's so much that we can talk about on the topic of Black history. You guys don't even know the second layer to this. We're on the very top. Think about an apple, right? That shiny wax that shouldn't even be there. That's where we are. We haven't even gotten to the actual skin of the fruit. Okay. So I could talk about this for hours, but we have to stop short now because we've been going for an hour and a half. I just want to thank you again because you really talked about this topic full circle and you didn't hold back. Robert says that's why they are trying to keep us from teaching. It didn't end with slavery. And it also didn't start with slavery, Robert. You have to know who Black people are in their entirety. I'm sorry. There's been a lot of Black people that were taken from various countries because we weren't all just in Africa either. That's another topic for another day. But a lot of us were scientists. A lot of us were astronomers. A lot of us were medical, doctors, or what they would call shamans in some cultures. And in other cultures, they would call them voodoo witch doctors, right? It just depends on where you come from. So we really need to know where it all started. In America, it starts with slavery for Black people, but that's not where the true origins began. And the same for Mexicans, right? Mexicans aren't really Mexicans, they're indigenous Americans. And it didn't start with being a Mexican, right? So there's so much that needs to be untangled, deprogrammed, and open up a fresh new perspective to learn the truth because we haven't been taught the truth. So I'm not going to keep us longer. Thank you so much, Arthur Ricardo, for being on the show today. We're definitely going to have to do a part 2 when you're free. I know you're a
Sure.
busy man.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I'm going to remove you from the stream, but is there any last words that you would like to say before you go?
Absolutely. You brought up Wall Street. And that's the reason though why I said that we need to make it official though. We need to make it official that Black people have a piece and not just not just be something that Black people do on the low. That's what causes it. If something bad were to happen, that particular community, that structure, if you will, it'll go unnoticed. That's why it needs to be an official thing. We have the power now. We have the tools now. So yeah, I believe I support reparations. I support reparations. I support giving a piece of land to Black people so they could have their own community. Because today we say things like Black communities. There is none. There is none because in a Black community, Indian liquor stores, Indian-owned liquor stores, Chinese-owned hair product. What Black communities? There's just places where black people live. So we need a real true sense of black communities that where you own everything in there. That would be a community, your own hospital, your own university, your everything. We don't have that. So anyway, thank you very much for inviting me. It's my pleasure. I have a lot more to say, but I know you got to end it. So we do another.
Oh, we both. It's such a great topic. I just, again, like, oh my gosh. Thank you so much for being on the show. I'm going to remove Ricardo, but don't go anywhere, Ricardo. If you got some time, wait behind the scenes. Guys, I just want to thank you again. This topic was just so amazing. I hope you guys took a lot of information away. Go back and do your research. Look up the origin of indigenous American people so you will know where it really truly began. Look up Native Americans. They weren't all just light-skinned colored people. Some of them look like me or even darker. This is the truth that we're talking about on my show. You know, I keep it real. But guys, always, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. I want you guys to have a safe and blessed Sunday. Make sure you like, comment, and share this video. And we will see you again next week. I will have on special guest, Mr. Holistic. We're going to be talking about some herbs, some really good earth-bound vegetables and fruits that you guys can use, especially women, to keep down that blood pressure and other things. And again, we're not doctors or nurses. We just want to share what God has given to us on this planet. Guys, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Have a blessed day.